There we go. No, that just fucking breaks. I'm losing my marbles a little bit. Yep, that short clip pretty much sums up my experience with this entire game. Let me introduce you to Hello Neighbour, a game released in 2017 that markets itself as a stealth horror, but is quite literally anything but. Now, I had not actually seen anything about this game prior to jumping in at the request of you beautiful people here on Patreon, so I was completely blind to what I was in for. And now that I'm on the other side, I can 100% say that this game can get right in the feckin' bin. But we're putting the cart before the horse here, so let's journey back to the beginning of the game and, without much further ado, let's get into it. Now, two things I need to note straight away here about my playthrough is that 1, I was playing on friendly mode. Look, I don't even care, alright? Come at me in the comments, but every guide online advised me to do this because it didn't affect the trophies and it made an insufferable game a little bit easier. And the second thing is how the trophy hunt is going to work because it's a little bit unusual. There are a total of 18 trophies for us to unlock, including the Platinum, but not a single one of them can be unlocked before you reach Act 3 of the game, which is just weird, but we'll get onto those later. For now, it's time to stumble our way through the first 2 acts. We start the game as a young boy kicking a ball down his neighborhood street. Eventually, we hear what sounds like a straight up murder coming from our neighbor's house, so we do what any sane person would do and investigate. What? What do you mean? What? Did I get taken? What the fuck? Is he attacking me? Oh, he is! What the fuck? Why is he attacking me? What do you mean? I'm so confused. I've only just loaded in. Yeah, wee bastard. And so we're introduced to the core element of this game, running and hiding from your neighbor. Nah, isn't he adorable? And look, I know we're supposed to be the protagonist here, but in all fairness, we are randomly breaking into this dude's house, so I mean, I'm kind of on his side for this one. Our objective in this first act seems to be to locate the red key so that we can unlock the basement. Which brings me on to talk about the personal record that I set while playing this game. The fastest amount of time it's taken me to look up a walkthrough that explains what the heck I'm supposed to be doing. Genuinely, after about 15 minutes of aimlessly wandering around with no real indication of what my next move was supposed to be, I just gave up. I was already at my wit's end. It felt like I was in one of those nightmares where you're sat taking a test but you realize that you've done naff all in the way of revision, so you just decide to bang your head against the table instead. And I want to take a moment here to point out that this wasn't because I'm an idiot. Alright, I've been gaming since I was in nappies. My gaming brain is so huge you can't even comprehend it. No, all of this wandering around is 100% because the game just doesn't give you any direction and its puzzles are completely illogical. I'm going to delve into that more later in the video, but I wanted to mention it now because I'm not going to be explaining the puzzles we complete in the first 2 acts, instead just speeding through them and explaining the overall story. Otherwise, we'd be here for hours. I'm not even kidding. Once we've located the red key and unlocked the door, we make our way into the basement, where we find pretty incriminating evidence that our neighbor has indeed been keeping someone locked down here. But instead of turning around and taking this information to the police, or the Lopais as they're called in this universe, we instead just delve deeper until we eventually reach this door. Okay, nice. Okay, well, now I'm running, I guess. Again, we did break into someone else's house, so this was kind of inevitable. Act 2 begins with us waking up in a locked room still in the basement, presumably after being kept down there for a while. We manage to escape and find ourselves outside the neighbor's house once again, and it looks like he's made some renovations while we've been gone. Love it. It's giving Scooby-Doo villain vibes. We make our way once again through another series of frustrating puzzles to eventually acquire the key to the front gate. I do have the key now though, to get out. So that's pretty good. Oh, for fuck. Come. You big smelly bastard. Ha! Oh, what a weird shot. Ooh la la. And here, in my opinion, is where the actual game begins. We awake in our very own apartment, now a much older version of the child we played as in the first 2 acts. But we're not allowed to get too comfortable as we're evicted pretty much straight away, and with nowhere else left to go, we decide to head back to our childhood home. It looks cozy. Thankfully, the neighbor's house seems to be abandoned and destroyed, so after a long day of moving, we decide to treat ourselves to a wee nap. Do you not have parents? Whoa. Or a nap that lasts a few years, I guess? Act 3 of Hello Neighbour is pretty much exactly the same objective-wise as Act 1. Infiltrate the house and discover what secrets the neighbour is hiding in the basement. Except that the house is just a touch bigger, and there is far more that we need to conquer within. And just as a side note, the house being bigger is actually a blessing when it comes to the stealth of this game. I literally went 20 minutes at a time never encountering the neighbor because there was just so much to explore. Feels like a strange gameplay evolution for the stealth to become easier as the game progresses, and I'm not entirely sure it was intentional. But anyway, it's time for us to finally unlock our first trophy and put ourselves on the board. And thankfully, it turned out to be an easy one. What? Oh, fuck. Oh, fuck. Look, I didn't play basketball when I was a kid, alright? I sat in my room with my PlayStation. What do you want from me? Ultimately, I had to cheese this one a bit, but I was so desperate to hear that unlock sound that my morals had gone out the window. And we earn Space Jam as a reward. Ah, much better. And I wanted to keep the trophy unlocks going, so I decided to take a bit of a longer break from the story to grab a few others, starting with the ones that required you to explore the wider map. I had read online before I started my hunt that there were a number of landmarks that I needed to visit in the 3rd act, but I couldn't for the life of me figure out how to leave the main street now that I was here. So I looked it up and just watch this. Wait, what? Does it make sense? Not even a little bit. But was I about done with questioning this game? I'd reached that point last Tuesday. After basically no clipping out of the game, we now had 6 more landmarks to visit, each with a trophy awarded for doing so. We visit a school, a factory, or at least I think it's a factory, a Lopez station with a RoboCop reference, a hospital, a supermarket, and a gas station. I don't like this. This makes me feel like I've broken the game, and I don't like it. Like I feel viscerally uncomfortable right now. You know, like I feel like I'm in a horror movie or a horror game, and I'm very aware that I'm somewhere I shouldn't be, and I hate it. I can't even describe to you how uncomfortable this is making me. Like when I hit the missing script thing, I was like, my stomach dropped. I knew it was going to happen as well. I knew I was going to find it, but my stomach just dropped. I hated it. Once all the landmarks had been visited, we reloaded a previous save to take us back to the main street, and I decided it was time to finally get cracking on the main story. Our ultimate goal, as I mentioned earlier, is to open up the basement, but there's a whole lot of stuff we need to do before getting to that point. To start with, we need to find and defeat 3 fear rooms, each of which will give us a special ability that we need to access the final boss fight. I stumbled onto the first one completely by accident, to be honest, and found myself inside a strange supermarket with a trolley. To complete this level, we need to put 5 specific items in our trolley and push it all the way to the end of the track. Whilst we're doing this, the other shoppers around us will chase and attack us, resetting us to the beginning. Luckily, the first power we're given here is the ability to become invisible when we crouch, allowing us to lose the attention of the shoppers if they spot us. It takes us a couple of tries and a little bit of guide help, but we eventually reach the end and unlock, bacon. Where the fuck did you get bacon from? The next fear room tasked us with making our way to the top of this closet whilst being teeny tiny. This was basically a simple traversal challenge, which, I can't lie, wasn't actually that bad. Once we reach the top, we take a running jump to this light switch, and when we grab it, unlock up, and the ability to double jump. Ironically, I didn't actually realize that I'd been given this power until much later on when I read about it in a guide, which was slightly annoying because it would have made certain sections significantly easier had I known about it. The final challenge required us to make our way through a school hallway. Whoa. So, it's going to be like that, is it? This challenge had a really simple concept, and yet was the most frustrating to complete, because you were relying heavily on RNG being in your favor. Essentially, we need to make our way from locker set to locker set without getting caught by the mannequins. This is made slightly easier by the ringing of the school bell, which disables all of them except one until the next bell rings. But this one mannequin turned out to be the sharpest of them all, and captured me again and again and again. By sheer perseverance and some luck thrown in on top, we finally arrive at the exit door. Hi. Now you look me in the eye and tell me that wasn't the most anticlimactic thing you've ever seen in your life. With the final fear room completed, we unlock Get 'em George and the ability to push an enemy away when we're grabbed. We also learn that our protagonist seems to have fears of trolleys, mannequins, and the storing of food. Fascinating. The next trophy on our list required us to complete a birthday-themed puzzle to find out what present was waiting for us. The puzzle requires us to locate 3 slices of birthday cake and 4 mannequins and bring them down to the party. But before we do that, we take one of the mannequins to the road outside and sentence it to death for bullying us in school and at the supermarket. Jesus. We take everything down to the party, and then it's time for the big moment. So I think I need to have everything like laid out perfectly. But how do you Bruh, I didn't even see it happen. I didn't even see it happen. Because I This gun is defective. It's shooting backwards. I got a gun as a birthday present? Ah, I knew this game was set in America. While we were grabbing the mannequins, we also took a moment to unlock another trophy once we'd found the one at the top of the building and yeeted it to its death. With the help of a couple of boxes, we climb our way to the tip top of the house and unlock top of the world. Oh, sweating from that. And then, once we'd grabbed the keycard and crowbar that we needed to unlock the basement, there was only one more trophy left to nab before we headed down into the finale. And that was Don't Bite Snow White. Now, there were a lot of things that annoyed me when it came to playing this game, but this one had to be near the top of that list. In order to obtain this trophy, we need to grow a tree. Yep, you heard me right. First of all, we find a golden seed on a platform at the top of the house and take it down to the front garden to plant it. Then we water it, of course, and then we have to sit back and wait. For 4.5 hours. This damn tree takes literal hours to grow, and you have to be in the game for this time to pass. It's not like it'll grow while you're offline or anything. No, you have to be in the game, unpaused, for this little shit to sprout. So, now that it looks like we've got some time to kill, let me take a moment to tell you about the puzzles in this game and why I hated them so much. As I mentioned earlier, I made the choice in this video to not talk about all of the puzzles I had to complete for the sake of time. But I did want to go through one puzzle solution so that you can understand what I mean when I say they were an absolute nightmare. Earlier I mentioned that we had found one of the birthday mannequins at the top of the house, and to get to this happy chappy we had to climb up this windmill, because my man has apparently built a friggin' amusement park on top of his house. But when we get to the roof, we find a forest of tomato trees blocking our path that we need to clear out. When I encountered this obstacle, my first thought was, oh, I must need an axe or something to chop them down, or maybe even something to burn them down with, because that seems logical. But the real solution is that we need to shrink them with a gramophone. You know, the other logical solution. Now, we find the gramophone on the other side of this room, which is filled to the brim with water. And because we can't swim and nothing seems to float on the water, we need to find another solution. Underneath the surface, we can see some radiators, and if we trace the power wire back to the source, we find this device. So maybe we need to do something with this to turn on the radiators and, I don't know, evaporate the water? The device looks like it needs something spherical. That much is at least obvious. So we scour the house looking for something that fits. One item we come across in droves are these basketballs, one of which we'd used earlier for a different trophy. So I think to myself that maybe these will work. But nope, the actual item we need to find is this random globe. Because of course it is. But it gets better, because we can't just put this globe in the device and call it quits. No. What we need to do is put the globe in the freezer. Then we take the now frozen globe back to the device, insert it, which then freezes the water and allows us to walk across it. And then we take the gramophone to the roof to clear the trees. What the fuck? And that basically sums up the logic system of every puzzle in this game. You had a few ones which actually did make sense, like this picture one which required us to recreate the painting in the room itself. But then the rest of them felt like the developers of the game put up a problem on a whiteboard, got everyone in the office to come and write a possible solution, and then said, alright, now I'm gonna close my eyes and spin 3 times and whatever I point at is the winner. If it wasn't for this YouTube channel, I never would have made any progress on this game, and you wouldn't be sat here watching this video right now. So, shout out to GTX HD Gamer. Anyways, it's been a few hours, so time to get back to the tree. And would you look at that, it's almost fully grown. Only a few more... My game crashed. Huh. Okay, just load it back up and... After waiting another few hours, the tree is finally grown and we can acquire what we've been waiting for. A golden apple. Oh, I did it! Oh, now I've got to wait for him. Please don't take my golden apple. I literally beg you, don't touch my golden apple. Don't touch my golden apple, please. There it is. And I died for getting it. And now, with all the other trophies unlocked, it's time for us to finally head into the basement of the house and finish up with the story. We find ourselves in basically the same basement as in Act 1, this time having to use our 3 newly acquired abilities to reach the exit and escape. Oh, hello. How are you, darling? You alright? Feck off. Act finale. Alright. Fuck, that's a bit dramatic, don't we think? Alright. I do. Oh, fuck. Hello. What do I do about you? Oi, 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 Macarena! Como está? Feck off. Why have you got a house on your head, Brosif? Brosif! I was shitting myself in this moment, thinking I'd have to get sparring with a cosmic horror version of the neighbor, but he doesn't actually do anything. He just stands there and grunts. So we set to work bullying him by hitting him with a firework and some baseballs, knocking him down to his knees and allowing us to access the house on the top of his head. When we do, we unlock the penultimate trophy, I Had No Choice. The final challenge of this game sees us tasked with protecting a younger version of ourselves from this absolute beast. Doing so is quite simple. All we need to do is position ourselves between the kid and the monster at certain key moments in front of windows, allowing us to take the hit and the kid to run somewhere else where he can get punched again. Remind me, why are we saving him? I was a bit confused during this segment though, because every time I got hit, my character would seem to levitate a bit higher. I eventually figured out that this wasn't a bug and was actually a choice from the game, making us taller and the space more difficult to traverse. A difficulty jump, I guess? And on what was definitely our first try... Yeah, I was meant to stay with him. Okay. I'm literally a glitchy mess. I was a fucking idiot when I was a kid. Oh, you're taking the piss. No, you're taking the piss. No, I'm so fucking... We reach the ending. Yeah, I'm in front of you. What? I mean, I did it, yay, but did I? Like, what did it just disappeared? I knew it was all in his head. Because he doesn't live there. Ah, the universally loved "it was all a dream" ending. Mwah. And with that, after far too many hours of headaches and confusion, we have unlocked the Hello Neighbour Platinum and our trophy hunt is completed. This game was not in any way what I expected it to be. I didn't necessarily have any strong expectations going in, but I had at least heard that it was a good game, one that a lot of people online recommended. But after playing it for myself, I have no idea why. Let's start with the story. Obviously, the story revolves around our main character going through a traumatic event and then having to overcome his trauma in the finale, which all makes sense. What doesn't make sense is how they chose to tell this story. The pacing is absolutely terrible, the pinnacle moments aren't obvious, and the finale introduces a villain to defeat that isn't the one we've been fighting against through the entire game. I get that the shadow creature is a manifestation of his trauma, sure, but we've only known the neighbor as our enemy for the entire game. The final mission is not where you introduce a new one for us to take down. I think this game would have fared much better if they had condensed the first 2 acts into a prologue and then extended the 3rd act as the main story of the game. This would have made more sense pacing and structure-wise, and would have been a better story overall. And part of me feels like that's what was supposed to happen, especially since no trophies are available in the first 2 acts. Moving away from the story, the gameplay itself was a solid okay. The movement was a bit janky at times and certain things wouldn't work as intended, but my main issue was the myriad of bugs and game crashes I ran into. One particular bug turned me into a crab after I randomly got killed on the tram. Wait, what? I can now only move sideways. Is this a bug or is this supposed to happen? I'm a fucking crab. Why am I a fucking crab? It did allow me to live out my dream of being Mr. Krabs though, I guess. But aside from these issues, everything else worked as it should have, which is kind of a bad thing in a way. I think I could have forgiven this game more if it had felt unfinished, but it didn't. Everything felt so intricate and deliberate that this game couldn't possibly be in an unfinished state, which means that this is how it was supposed to be, and the puzzles were by design, which I just cannot wrap my head around. The puzzles were by far the biggest downfall of the game. They weren't hard, they were illogical, and there's a very big difference between the two, which I don't think the developers realized. Even just a couple of hints here and there to point you in the right direction would have made this an infinitely better experience to go through. As for the trophies, they also suffered at the hands of the game's poor pacing. Having none to unlock until you're in the final third of the game was an extremely strange choice, especially since you could have easily added some during the first 2 acts. And I have to question these wider map trophies and what exactly the point of them was. It felt like the developers had a larger game plan that they then either couldn't be bothered to execute or ran out of time to finish. I mean, to get to them, you literally had to find a missing script icon. It's not the best look. Overall though, the trophy hunt didn't really add any extra difficulty to the game as many of them were unlocked alongside story segments, so there's that at least. And now there's nothing else left to do but show the final stats. Have a great day and happy hunting.